Final Fantasy X-2, yes, I'm still doing this bit, was released in March of 2003 following Squaresoft's change into Square Enix. It was the first, though certainly not the last, direct sequel to a mainline Final Fantasy game. Taking place 2 years after the end of Final Fantasy X, X2 follows Yuna in her escapades as a sphere hunter. Sort of. In truth, the whole sphere hunter thing is more of a backdrop to the storyline, which I'll talk about a bit later, but just know I'm going to be spoiling parts of the last game when I do. If you want to play it or find out the story for yourself, either play it or Google. I'm not gonna judge you either way. So, X2. Something's changed, something's stayed the same. Immediately the most noticeable difference is the combat. I mean, technically the most immediately noticeable difference would be the tonal shift from X to X2, but like I said, later. Gone is the turn-based combat from X. Instead, we have this battle system that Square lovingly calls ATB, or Active Time Battle. While this is more reminiscent of earlier titles in the series, I won't lie and say I didn't prefer X's combat. This attempt at a mixture of real-time and turn-based is not fun, in my opinion. There are some things I do like that come as a result of it, like chaining attacks together to deal more damage or interrupting attacks with good timing, but the same can be done to you, and it's frustrating because most times you can't really do anything about it. I don't know if it's just in my head, but on occasion it seems like enemies' attack animations can't be interrupted unless it's just before the attack itself. They can still attack if you hit while they're attacking, or will still even follow through with that attack after you try to interrupt it. The same can't be said of you. The amount of times I've seen Riku's 2-hit attack be effectively negated because of an enemy's attack is staggering. Again, maybe that's just me. I also noticed that there are moves that can change where you're standing on the battlefield, but you can't move at all without them. At least you can't move outside of movements made as a result of attacking or a choice akin to it. You know, movement alone isn't an option, and abilities with movement showcased as a feature of them is few and far between. I'm honestly not even sure if this has any kind of impact on combat at all, and if not, why was it a feature? In combat, you can also change dress spheres as according to your equipped garment grid. Garment grids are miniature sphere grids, though their effects aren't quite the same. The sphere grid in X is intrinsically tied towards leveling, and garment grids are tied more towards abilities and your character's overall capabilities in combat. You can attach dress spheres, and only dress spheres, I should add, to garment grids, and each garment grid has their own specifics. One allows the person equipped with it to use black magic regardless of which dress sphere is in use. Another garners basic bonuses to various defenses or grants immunity to certain status effects. Here's something though, in order to gain some of those bonuses tied to the grid, you must actively change your dress spheres in combat. One garment grid goes by the name of Abominable, and it grants ribbon for the rest of combat so long as you change dress spheres and connect the icons on the grid. A dress sphere is effectively a character's class, or, since this is Final Fantasy, a take on the job system. Each one grants new abilities and changes up how a character may function in combat, sometimes drastically. The first one you get is a songstress at the end of the prologue/tutorial, and immediately you'll notice a very key difference. The songstress can't attack directly, it focuses almost entirely on buffing and debuffing. It's not the only dress sphere that doesn't have a basic attack if you're curious, just the first one you come across. Altogether, there's quite a few dress spheres in the game, and with New Game Plus being a feature that exists, you can eventually have multiples of the same dress sphere, allowing you to connect lines on the garment grid without actually changing what you can do in combat. Thankfully, since you'll be switching around a lot, at least in your first playthrough, leveling isn't tied to your dress spheres or garment grids. That's a separate thing, but your dress spheres do have a leveling system themselves, with AP being spent towards abilities. That is to say, you choose an ability to learn and all of the AP that you earn is automatically allotted to it. Once that ability gains enough AP, you learn it, and a new ability is automatically selected next from your equipped dress sphere. Or you can choose one, and the process continues either way. Importantly, you can only learn abilities and gain AP for those abilities for a dress sphere you currently have equipped. You can't learn a warrior ability if you're using or have equipped a gunner dress sphere, and vice versa. And if you have no more abilities to learn from a dress sphere you have equipped, you're no longer gaining AP as a result. So it's best to equip something new to continue learning new abilities. Your dress sphere, apart from deciding what your abilities are, also decides A, on how you look, and B, on your attacks. The thief has a quick 2-hit basic attack, and the warrior has a stronger single-hit basic attack. You notice that some dress spheres even have weapons that are tied towards other weapons found from the last game, such as Rikku using a weapon similar to one of Auron's while the samurai dress sphere is equipped, or, perhaps more noticeable, Yuna using Titus's Brotherhood from X. Which brings me to the point that equipment is more limited this time around. Kind of. You've got garment grids and their respective dress spheres as well as accessories, but that is it. All you really have are those things. You can't decide on your weapon or a shield or something like that. You can have 2 accessories equipped with varying effects, and depending on the garment grid, some overlap in terms of those effects, but not weapons or anything else for that matter. This time, it's a bit more annoying to try and get your main party overpowered. emphasis here is on main party. This game has creature creation. In terms of literal definition, it's less creature creation and more creature development. You can catch creatures or a person in some instances from all over Spira and use them in your party at any time. Of course, they're mostly used in the Fiend arena, but you can also just use Yuna, Rikku, and Paine for that if you want. The point is, this creature development can be broken. Not strictly speaking easily, I'll grant you, but more easily than trying to break your main party. Creature development hinges on using accessories and items to grant them new abilities and bonuses, which firstly cost whatever accessory or item you use, and secondly you can't do for Yuna, Rikku, and Paine. There's a video online by Primal Liquid that showcases this best, but the short version is that you can break it. It isn't even necessarily that difficult, it just needs patience. In his case, a lot of patience. Personally, I'm a big fan of the whole customize your own monster thing. Customization in terms of both aesthetics and mechanics is always something I'll advocate for, provided it's done well, and I always enjoy being able to break a game. Break as in become disgustingly overpowered, not break as in green screen forever. Which brings me to the good news, no green screen. Kind of. Throughout the entire game, I didn't get a single one until the end. Literally, the final FMV in the game was green screened. I'm not mad, I'm just impressed. What a fucking joke. That said, the game did have some other issues. Your brother here's having a true out-of-body experience, which didn't get fixed with time if you're curious, so I had to restart for brother to find himself again. And the game crashed 5 times. Yes, I kept count, once during a boss. So yeah, that's always fun. Fixed camera angles can be good for puzzles wherein viewpoints are important, but they can also cause some problems. At one point there was a clue to a puzzle in Bevel that I didn't realize was there because of the camera angle and only found out after the fact. At another instance, there was a save point entirely obscured by a machine. You can actually pinpoint the exact moment I noticed it was there on the mini-map in the corner of the screen. Literally, had it not been for the map, I wouldn't have saved. Seemingly unintentional moments like these are never good, and a part of me wonders if this is a holdover from porting maps from the first game instead of considering how it might be now when the situation's different. I've got no reason to believe that though, so for now it's just a hunch. The save files tell you how much of the story you've completed as a percentage, but don't let that fool you. Despite being labeled as the story, it's actually a total percentage of everything, with more content unlocking as you progress through the game's 5 chapters. I beat a portion of the Fiend Arena, some side missions, and the main story, about 50% story completion. It's nice to know how much is remaining, but it's less nice that it's as vague as it is. It doesn't give you amounts of what remains, like how much is left of the arena, or side missions for example, which I imagine has to do with saving screen space. Sphere Break is one of the minigames you can come across. It's akin to Blitzball and Final Fantasy VIII's Triple Triad in that it spans Sphere and has some interesting things tied to it. Your introduction to it, if you win, has a dress sphere as your reward. On the surface, this math game is pretty nice, but I have some issues with its presentation. Specifically, it's shown as if it's a head-to-head minigame, but unlike Blitzball and Triple Triad, it isn't. And not really. You don't see opponents' moves or anything like that, it doesn't seem like the same rules apply to them. I've never once seen an opponent win because they reached the required quota before the turn timer ended, even though that's stated as the goal of the game, only when I've lost at the end of that timer. Which means that the opponent's win condition isn't the same as your own. You've got one win condition and a few lose conditions. Your opponent has the opposite, one lose condition and a few win conditions. So the challenge isn't beating someone in a head-to-head situation, it's simply not losing as if the opponent isn't even there. I mentioned that it's one of the minigames because there's a few. A lot. Some are literally cordoned off in their own little area, others yet to partake in to progress the story. Give a massage too and to ultimately satisfy a thief. Sell tickets while paying attention to their price. Rescue tourists in a cave but note the order in which they follow you. Rehearse for a concert. 3 of those are required and I'm not going to tell you which ones, and those aren't even all of them. A fair amount of the main storyline comes off as filler, things that didn't really need to be there, and these minigames don't really help that feeling if I'm being honest. You could probably lose all of Chapter 4 and the story wouldn't really be affected. There are 2 interesting additions, however. One, you can climb things. And let me save you a lot of headache. Climb everything, literally everything. Just hold that button down pretty much forever. If you don't think you can climb something, hold it anyway. You stand to lose nothing for doing so, and you might be pleasantly surprised what you can climb, because the game offers no hints at what you can and can't clamber all over. And the only way to know is by holding that button down like you're an overexcited priest trying to baptize that plastic pinhead. 2, this game has multiple endings, and these endings can come as a result of a few factors, one of which is, of course, the percentage of story completion. I mean, what were you expecting? Another one requires you to press a button during the second to last cutscene in the game, entirely unprompted. I did this by accident, if I'm being honest. Most of these endings are more like additions to the regular ending, like you still get a specific cutscene involving specific characters, but you also get other cutscenes shortly afterward or before involving other characters. So there are 4 endings, kind of 5 if you lose to the final boss, that play off each other. I like that. I understand the idea that a game's endings need to be overly drastic in order to entice someone to replay the game, just to see those endings, but from a story standpoint it makes more sense that the endings here aren't overly different from each other. It allows for anyone and everyone to get the gist of what happened without effectively forcing them to have to replay everything to get a clear, concise picture. And because the game isn't built on the foundation of choices matter, like in the Mass Effect series, there's already a clear point where the story should end. The developers didn't have to consider any of a vast number of possibilities about the ending. Everything that happens in the game is going to be everyone's experience, so they don't have to worry about how any one ending should be different from another, and instead are free to build on what's already been there the entire time. So I like that, but why don't I like Final Fantasy X-2? Yeah, I've been mulling that over for a bit. It's weird to admit, and I certainly didn't want the first game that I review and didn't like to be a game from my childhood. But, in my defense, I also didn't play it nearly as much as I did Final Fantasy X because X was a game I never beat. It didn't make sense to go too far into its sequel. I've been giving it a lot of thought, and I think I understand. In X, the story follows Titus, an ace blitzball player torn from his home of Xanarkand at the metaphorical hands of Sin and the literal hands of Orin. Importantly, Spira is a place widely unknown to him. He's the odd man out, and narrates the events of the game from what seems to be the aftermath. There's this calm regret to his voice, a bittersweet melancholy that shows how much he wished things had been different. Everything about this clearly telegraphed how things would end with both its presentation and its execution, to the point where even you, as the player, slowly understood what would happen at the end of Yuna's pilgrimage long before Titus himself did. It wasn't something that ever felt hidden. It was somewhat depressing and almost tangible, with this tension to everything happening that only rose after Titus discovered what obtaining the final Aeon would actually cost. There was a slight twist by the end, but it still had that core of Pyrrhic, almost hollow victory against odds that thus far had seemed insurmountable. Titus himself says it best when the game starts.
Listen to my story. This may be our last chance.
You know what's going to happen. You know that, like every other book ever written, a story has an ending, and this story rides on that feeling of unfortunate inevitability from its beginning to its end. It's constant. In X-2, Yuna's taken on the job of being a sphere hunter alongside Rikku and Paine, the first being her cousin and former guardian, and the second being someone you actually don't know too much about at the start of the game. Together, these three are members of the Gullwings, and alongside brother, buddy, and Shinra, trek the globe in search of various bits of treasure as the job description would suggest. This game is very different in terms of tone from its predecessor, taking on a much more happy-go-lucky feel. On its own, this would be fine, but it's inconsistent. I like some of Yuna's almost introspective narrations, and hearing her disappointments about the so-called eternal calm be neither eternal nor calm is nice, as she delves deeper into a problem that raises more questions than it could ever answer, and trying to find this balance of what she knows is right and how to go about doing it. But that's something serious, and the game lacks the balance between what's serious and what isn't. There's this moment where Yuna is asked to sing on top of the Celcius, your flying ship, to help cheer everyone up. It's clearly meant to be this feel-good moment, and immediately afterward you get hit with something that isn't. It's admittedly a more tame example. There's a much more extreme one later on, an event that negatively impacts almost all of Spira, and the characters and their interactions suggest something wholly different from that. That's my problem. That's why I don't like Final Fantasy X-2. It's not that it's too happy or that it's too sad. It's that it feels like it's trying to do both, and it's just not clicking with me. It's not the only problem I have, but it's the biggest one in my eyes. There's also an inconsistency with the pacing and story moments tied to it. The pacing and story can change as a result of the missions you take and the order you take them in, so I guess it makes sense that the pacing has some issues and I can forgive that, but it still has those issues. Another problem, if I'm being honest, is music. It's fairly hit or miss for me, but since music, like almost everything, is up to personal taste, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not your ears are satisfied.
All yours, Yuna. Where are you going?
Final Fantasy X-2 was a game I'm surprised that I didn't like. Everything about it, on its surface level at least, screamed that it would be something I would enjoy, and I'm certain that my feelings on it are less objective fact and more subjective opinion. I don't like it because it's not for me. On the bright side, there's 14 other mainline Final Fantasy games I can check out, and around 50-ish spin-offs, not to mention remasters, remakes, and other direct sequels. Story out.
We'll tell him that you're waiting like a good girl.
You do that, love. And don't forget to stress, good girl.